Hello, today I'm going to be reviewing Kamigawa Neon Dynasty, the gold cards, colorless, and land. If you'd like to see the guide, please take a look at the white review. Asari Captain, 3 red-white for a creature human samurai, a 4/3 with haste, and whenever a samurai or warrior you control attacks alone, it gets +1/+0 until end of turn for each samurai or warrior you control. So on its own attacking, this is a 5/3 haste for 5. Which is pretty decent. Not getting a toughness boost is a significant downside, as this dies to most of the burn in the set, although making each of your samurais or warriors a decent threat is not bad. Ultimately, the attacks alone just doesn't quite get there, and that while some of the individual cards are pretty good, the archetype as a whole is just not strong compared to the other things going on in the set. This is a C. Colossal Sky Turtle, 4 green/blue, enchantment creature, turtle. A 6/5 with flying and ward 2, and channel. 2 and a green, discard it. Return target card from your graveyard to your hand. And channel. 1 and a blue, discard it. Return target creature to its owner's hand. This is effectively a modal card with 3 modes. The primary mode you're going to use this for is probably the bounce. At 2 mana returning a creature, it's quite solid for reusing sagas or blowing out creature-based removal. But there are also some late game loops that can be done with this and some of the green return cards, because this returns target card, not permanent card, which can give infinite value. Even just on its front face, a 6/5 flying ward 2 for 7 is quite strong finisher, and really good in the green-blue decks because of all the ramp. This is a B. Django Uprising, X red-white for a sorcery. Create X 2/2 white samurai creature tokens with vigilance. They gain menace and haste until end of turn. And then each opponent creates X-1 2/2 white samurai creature tokens with vigilance, so you'll always get 1 more than your opponent. That means if you cast this for 3, this is a 2/2 menace haste for 3, which is fine. Not great stats, but you're not ashamed to play it, especially with the other samurai boosters. This can also be a finisher, as your creatures have menace when you attack with them, allowing you to overwhelm your opponent's defenses. They also have vigilance, meaning that you're not going to get Alpha Strike back, unless they have a huge amount of creatures, in which case you can just cast this for 1x, just giving you a 1 creature for 1 card, which is fine. Again, the red-white color combination is not the strongest, but it can definitely get there, and this is one of the very solid pieces. This is a B. Enthusiast Mechanaut, blue-red for an artifact creature, Goblin Artificer, a 2/2 with flying, and artifact spells you cast cost 1 less to cast. 2 mana cost reducers have always been quite strong, and is set with lots of artifact creatures. This gets additional benefits. It also just has Windjig stats for only 2 mana, making you not ashamed to play this even with no artifacts in hand. This is a solid B. Gloom Shrieker, 1 green/black for an enchantment creature, Cat Beast, a 2/1 with menace, and when it enters the battlefield, return target permanent card from your graveyard to your hand, and if it would die, exile it instead. The exile clause stops some of the Eternal Witness type loops. However, this card works very well with ninjutsu, in that the menace prevents it from being blocked very efficiently, and then you can bounce it back, get another card, play it, and just keep going with that value. This is especially good in the bug decks, and 3 color is very reasonable. This is a B. Greasefang, Okiba Boss, 1 white/black for a legendary creature, Rat Pilot, a 4/3. At the beginning of combat on your turn, return target vehicle card from your graveyard to the battlefield. It gains haste. Return it to its owner's hand at the beginning of your next end step. So if you're playing this on curve, you're not going to have any vehicles in the graveyard. However, this does crew every vehicle in the set, meaning that if you looted beforehand or get discarded, that can be an advantage. Vehicles don't die very often, but if they do, this is a decent bit of card advantage. Overall though, there's a decent amount of setup, and most of the time this is a 4/3 for 3 with no abilities, which is pretty lackluster for a rare. This is a C+. Hidetsugo Consumes All, 1 red/black for Saga. The first chapter, destroy each non-land permanent with mana value 1 or less. The second, exile all graveyards. Then it flips into a Vessel of the All-Consuming, a enchantment creature, Ogre Shaman, 3/3 with trample, and when it deals damage, put a 1/1 counter on it. And then if it deals damage to a player, if it had dealt 10 or more damage to that player this turn, they lose the game. There are a decent amount of 1-drops in the set, and this also kills all tokens. So the first chapter is decent, but against some decks it's just going to be a blank. The second, again, is situationally useful, Green definitely recurs things from the graveyard, as does red, so that can matter. And then the creature you get from it is a fine creature, 3/3 trample for 3. Is not bad, although coming in on turn 5 is a bit late, and only attacking on turn 6. The third clause is never going to be relevant, but the fact that it continually grows is fine. Overall, this is just situationally broken, but most of the time it's going to be mediocre. This is a C. Hinata, Dawn Crowned. 1 blue, red, white for a legendary creature, Kirin Spirit. A 4/4 with flying and trample, and spells you cast cost 1 less to cast for each target, and spells your opponents cast cost 1 more to cast for each target. Just at its base level, a 4/4 flying trample for 4 is quite good. It also sort of gives a ward 1 type effect for all your creatures, and then makes certain cards really difficult to cast for your opponent, in addition to reducing auras on your own side, as well as making pump effects or save effects quite strong. While 3 color can be difficult, the payoff is definitely here, and this is an A-. Invigorating Hot Spring. 1 red-green for an enchantment. It enters the battlefield with 4 1/1 counters on it, and modify creatures you control have haste. And then remove a 1/1 counter from it. Put a 1/1 counter on target creature you control. Activate this only as a sorcery and only once each turn. Mostly this gives haste to all your creatures, as well as pumps them up when it enters the battlefield. That's quite good, although only really good on offense, as pumping a creature 1 at a time for 3 mana is just not worth it. There will be times where this rots in your hand against control-heavy decks, but the ability to play a 6/5 or something similar, and then slam in with it with trample and haste, is very strong, and is definitely something red-green decks want to be doing. This is a B. Ishin, 2 heavens is 1. Red, white, black, legendary creature, human samurai, a 3/4 with. If creature attacking causes a triggered ability of a permanent you control to trigger, that ability triggers an additional time. So this is a further samurai support, triggering all the exalted type effects twice, while being a 3/4 for 3 by itself. Unfortunately on its own it is just that, a 3/4 for 3, with no added benefit and being difficult to cast. While it can make other things worthwhile and can even win the game if everything comes together, most of the time this just gives 1 additional trigger, maybe +1/+1 or similar, which is fine, but not impressive in any way. This is a C+. Jukai Naturalist. Green-white, enchantment creature, human monk, a 2/2 with lifelink, and enchantment spells you cast cost 1 less to cast. Just like the Mechanaut, this is very strong, and even stronger due to the prevalence of sagas in the set, in addition to just securing the ground game, gaining a few life, and being an enchantment itself. There's nothing to really dislike here, and this is a B+. Kaito Shizuki. 1 blue-black, legendary planeswalker Kaito. Starts with 3 loyalty, and at the beginning of your end step, if he entered the battlefield this turn, he phases out. +1 is draw a card, then discard a card unless you attack this turn. The -2 is create a 1/1 blue ninja creature token with this creature can't be blocked. And the -7 is you get an emblem with whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to a player, search your library for a blue or black creature card, put it on the battlefield, then shuffle. Planeswalkers with any sort of token generating ability are always going to be very strong. This can also be a card advantage engine and has protection on the turn you play it. All that combined makes this very powerful, especially at only 3 mana. This is an A. The Kami War. 1 white, blue, black, red, green. The first chapter. Exile target non-land permanent an opponent controls. The second. Return up to 1 other target non-land permanent into its owner's hand. Then, each opponent discards a card. And then it flips into a enchantment creature dragon spirit 6/6. It is all colors with flying and trample, and when it attacks, defending player chooses a non-land card in your graveyard. Return that card to your hand. Then it gets +X+0 until end of turn, or X is the mana value of that card. Effectively, this gives you approximately a 5/1, and utterly dominates the game. Your deck has to revolve around casting this, but when you do, it wins the game. While it can't defeat all your opponent's things, killing one and then on the next turn bouncing something generally secures the board enough for the 6/6 flying trample that recurs cards to take over and win very quickly. Because of how difficult it is to cast, this does have some downsides. This is a B. Kotos, the Silent Spider. 3 blue-black for a legendary creature, Human Ninja, a 4/4 with. When it enters the battlefield, exile target card other than a basic land card from an opponent's graveyard. Search that player's graveyard, hand, and library for any number of cards with the same name as that card, and then exile them. Then, that player shuffles. For as long as you control Katose, you may play one of those exiled cards, and you may spend mana as though it were mana of any color to cast it. So basically, this steals a card from the graveyard, and you can cast it for as long as she lives. It can also take cards from their hand, if they happen to have extra copies of that. It's also a 4/4 for 5, which is okay, although you really need to cast the card in order to get what you want for that kind of mana cost. Still, it's relatively difficult to kill, and needs to be killed, rather than just pacified or similar. This is a B. Naomi, Pillar of Order. 3 white-black for a legendary creature, Human Advisor, a 4/4 with. Whenever Naomi enters the battlefield or attacks, if you control an artifact and enchantment, create a white 2/2 samurai creature token with vigilance. That's a pretty good end of the battlefield effect, just getting that value, and then having it on every attack is quite solid. The difficulty, of course, is attacking with a 4/4 on turn 6, and having it survive, ignoring removal, other creatures, just all these other things. It can be quite difficult, although if you're getting 2/2/2s, then them trading isn't that bad of a deal. Ultimately though, the artifact and enchantment deck lacks consistency compared to some of the others, and that brings this down a bit. This is a B-. Oni Cult Anvil. Red-black for an artifact. Whenever one or more artifacts you control leave the battlefield during your turn, create a 1/1 colorless construct artifact creature token. This ability triggers only once each turn, and then tap, sack an artifact, drain your opponent. So notably, you only create a 1/1 on your turn, and that's only once each turn. But if it's a board stall, you can keep creating 1/1, killing it, creating it, killing it, draining every single turn, and that's ignoring any value you get from other things. These get really strong in multiples, but even just by itself, it offers a lot of value and a good way to end the game. This is a B+. Prodigy's Prototype. 1 white-black for an artifact vehicle, 3/4. Whenever one or more vehicles you control attack, create a 1/1 pilot with crew 2. This is able to create a lot of tokens, and works very well with flying or otherwise evasive vehicles. Where it is a bit let down is if you have to use itself to attack, as most of the time it's just going to die in combat, and the 1/1s are not particularly useful after that. There's just not enough mass pump in the set to make these token generators have all that much value, unless you can do something else with them. And as pilots, they're fine, but generally you're going to have enough creatures anyway. This is a C+. Ryu Storm's Edge. 2 red-white for a legendary creature, Human Samurai, a 3/3 with first strike, and whenever a samurai or warrior you control attacks alone, untap it. If it's the first combat phase of the turn, there's an additional combat phase after this phase. This is what you need if you really want red-white to work, as that additional combat phase is a huge advantage, and can just end the game itself. Even just on its own, a 4-mana 3/3 that generates an additional combat, combined with any sort of combat tricks, is very strong. This is a B+. Risona, Asari Commander, 1 red-white for a legendary creature, Human Samurai, haste, and when it deals combat damage to a player, if it doesn't have an indestructible counter on it, put an indestructible counter on it, and whenever combat damage is dealt to you, remove an indestructible counter from it. So if this comes in swinging and gets the indestructible counter, it can start quite a snowball. Especially in aggressive decks, this can be strong. And if your opponent is attacking you, that means they have 1 less blocker. If you're behind, this card gets quite bad, and that the hasty 3/3 isn't very good at blocking, and while it can attack, it doesn't do that much, and loses that indestructibility almost immediately. Still, aggressive stats and kind of difficult to take down do help make this a solid threat. This is a B. Satoru Umezawa, 1 blue-black for a legendary creature, Human Ninja. It's a 2/4 with, whenever you activate a ninjutsu ability, look at the top 3 cards of your library. Put 1 of them in your hand and the rest on the bottom of your library in any order. This ability triggers only once each turn, and each creature card in your hand has ninjutsu 2 blue-black. So if you manage to get this started, it's very strong. He has to sit back, as if you bounce him you don't get any benefit, but sending in other creatures to ninjutsu, draw you cards, get their benefit, it's quite strong. The downside, of course, is if he's your only creature, then he's basically 2/4 for 3, which is just not very strong. There's definitely advantages here, but the whole package just doesn't quite come together, as most of your best ninjutsu effects are on 2 or 3 mana, meaning you have to delay them if you want to get the value off this. This is a B-. Satsuki the Living Lore, green-white, for a legendary creature human druid, a 1/3 with tap. Put a lore counter on each saga you control, activate only as a sorcery. And when they die, choose one. Return target saga or enchantment creature you control to its owner's hand, or return target saga card from your graveyard to your hand. This is actually worse with the Kamigawa sagas than they are with others, as they're not going to go to your graveyard quite as often, and accelerating them doesn't do as much. It makes them their creature form, but doesn't get sort of the huge boost that some of the previous ones have had. Still, a 1/3 for 2 that can help get these creatures a turn or two faster is pretty significant. The fact that when it dies you will generally get a card out of it is also quite strong. This is a B+. Silver Fur Master. Blue-black for a creature rat ninja, a 2/2 with ninjutsu for blue and a black. Ninjutsu abilities you activate cost 1 less to activate, and other ninja and rogue creatures you control get +1/+1. That's quite a few things, although its own ninjutsu ability is not that useful. It can help reuse enter the battlefield effects, which is nice, but most of the time the surprise is going to be, hey, I have a 2/2 now. Still, having the Lord effect as well as a cost reducing effect is quite a lot on a 2/2 for 2. This is a B+. Spirit Sister's Call. 3 white-black for an enchantment. At the beginning of your end step, choose target permanent card in your graveyard. You may sacrifice a permanent that shares a card type with the chosen card. If you do, return the chosen card from your graveyard to the battlefield and it gains. If that permanent would leave the battlefield, exile it instead of putting it anywhere else. This is kind of a weird reanimator effect, so basically you can trade your token creatures for other creatures in your yard, though you can't just keep recurring the same things back and forth because of the exile clause. And at 5 mana, it needs to do something immediately, so you probably want some sort of self-mill or looting effect or similar. But if the deck's designed around this, it's going to be one of the best cards. If it's not, this is pretty lackluster. Doing it every turn is definitely strong and will get the advantage in a long game, so this is a B. Tamiyo, Complicated Sage, 2 green-blue, Phyrexian green-blue hybrid. A legendary planeswalker Tamiyo with 5 loyalty and Complicated, and enters with 2 less loyalty if you paid the Phyrexian mana cost. It has +1, freeze target creature or artifact. -X, exile target non-land permanent card with mana value X from your graveyard. Create a token that's a copy of the card. And then -7, create Tamiyo's Notebook, a legendary colorless artifact token with spells you cast cost 2 less to cast, and tap, draw a card. Tamiyo is quite strong, defensively and offensively. The ability to freeze something as a +1 is going to keep things down for quite a while, and it can ultimate really quickly if you pay the full mana cost. The option to play it for either 4 or 5 mana is quite helpful as well, and the 2 life is not going to matter very much. If it's just going to die, you can also just trade it for a 3-drop or 5-drop from your yard, which is another good option. Most planeswalkers are quite strong and limited, and this is no exception. While it can't turn a game around completely, there's a lot of advantage in this card, and a lot of utility. This is an A. Automated Artificer, 2 for an artifact creature Artificer, a 1/3 with tap, add Colorless. Spend this mana only to activate an ability or cast an artifact spell. So this is the 2 mana ramp thing, but only for artifacts. The fact that it's an artifact itself and a 1/3 means it's pretty good defensively early, and can help ramp and do quite a few things just given the sheer number of artifacts in the set. Not tapping for any colors is pretty significant, but this is a decent card in the artifacts decks, and this is a C+. Bronze Cudgels, 1 for an artifact equipment. 2, until end of turn, equip creature gets +X+0, where X is the number of times this ability is evolved this turn, for equip for 1. So after you equip this, you pay 2, it gets +1/+0. You pay another 2, it gets +3/+0. You pay another 2, and then it gets +5/+0. This feels like very old school card design in that you have to pay a lot of mana for not very much benefit. Even as a 1 mana artifact, this is just really bad. This is an F. Brute Suit, 3 mana for an artifact vehicle, 4/3, Vigilance and Crew 1. This is not bad. Turning any of your creatures into 4/3 is pretty significant, although this dies to a lot of the creatures in the set as well, including some miscellaneous 3-power tokens. Still, it's a vehicle for vehicle decks, an artifact for artifact decks, and it's generally going to trade for a decent creature. This is a C+. Circuit Mender, 3 mana for an artifact creature insect, a 2/3. When it enters the battlefield, you gain 2 life. When it leaves the battlefield, draw a card. This little fox-type creature is pretty good. It's just always going to trade for a card, and that leaves the battlefield ability, means that it works for ninjas, works in artifact decks, helps to gain some life. In general, it just gives you everything you want, and there's very few decks where you wouldn't want this. This is a Containment Construct, 2 mana for an artifact creature construct. It's a 2/1 with, whenever you discard a card, you may exile that card from your graveyard. If you do, you may play that card this turn. This effectively gives every card in your hand madness equal to its mana cost, which is a huge effect. There's a number of free looting effects in the set, which makes this even better. It's unfortunate that it's so fragile at a 2 mana 2/1, but that does mean it trades for a lot of other early threats. This is good in many scenarios, even without looting, so this is a B-. Dramaticist's Puppet, 4 mana for an artifact creature construct. It's a 2/4 with, when it enters the battlefield, for each kind of counter on target permanent, put another counter of that kind on it, or remove one from it. If this was a proliferate type effect that could mess around with everything, this would be pretty good, but as it stands, it can advance the saga 1 step, or make it back 1 step, and it's a 4 mana 2/4. This just doesn't do enough and is a D. Eater of Virtue, 1 mana for legendary artifact equipment. Whenever equipped creature dies, exile it, and equipped creature gets +2/+0 with equip for 1. As long as a card exiled with Eater of Virtue is flying, equipped creature is flying. Same is true for First Strike, Double Strike, Death Touch, Haste, Hexproof, Indestructible, Lifelink, Menace, Protection, Reach, Trample, and Vigilance. So basically, all the keywords from the dead creatures go to the new creature, but even on its own, this is a Bone Splitter. 1 mana for +2/+0 with equip for 1. That's incredibly strong, and was one of the best equipments in the original Mirrodin set. This mirrors it with additional bonuses. This is an A-. Ecologist Terrarium, 2 mana for an artifact. When it enters the battlefield, you may search your library for a basic land card, reveal it, put it in your hand, then shuffle. And 2, tap, sack it, put a 1/1 counter on target creature. Activate only as a sorcery. This is a great color-fixing artifact that helps with those synergies, helps with modified synergies, and in general can add a lot of consistency to non-aggressive decks. This is never going to be your best card, but the miscellaneous value is going to add up, meaning this is quite strong. This is a C+. High Speed Hoverbike, 2 mana for an artifact vehicle, 2/2 with flash and flying. When it enters the battlefield, tap up to 1 target creature with crew 1. This can be a ninjutsu enabler. Admittedly, it's a little bit annoying in that you need to crew it, then attack with it, and then ninjutsu it, and you need that creature first, but the ability to tap creatures at instant speed is fairly strong, as well as just having this artifact come down. It unfortunately doesn't get in much damage, but being a 2/2 flyer for 2 is fine, and anything can crew it. This is a C+. Iron Apprentice, 1 mana for an artifact creature construct. It enters the battlefield with a 1/1 counter, and when it dies, if it had counters on it, put those counters on target creature you control. This little bean will help defend against early aggression, put counters on things, artifact synergy. Again, this set is very synergy focused, meaning that cards that are not that great get better. This is a C+. Mech Titan Core, 2 mana for an artifact creature vehicle. It's a 2/4 with crew 2, and pay 5 mana, exile it, and 4 other artifact creatures and or vehicles you control. Create Mech Titan, a legendary 10/10 construct artifact creature token with flying, vigilance, trample, lifelink, and haste that's all colors. When the token leaves the battlefield, return all cards exiled with Mech Titan Core except Mech Titan Core to the battlefield tapped, under their owner's control. So this assembles Voltron, assuming you can get 4 other artifact creatures and vehicles. It's not the easiest thing, but also not the hardest, as they really did push artifact creatures in this set. Assembling that basically wins you the game, although there are a few things to watch out for, such as the crab that counters abilities or pacifism type effects. Still, even just as a 2/4 for 2 with crew 2 is passable, and the dream is definitely alive and real, and not that hard to do. This is a B-. Mirror Box, 3 mana, artifact. The legend rule doesn't apply to permanents you control. Each legendary creature you control gets +1/+1, and each non-token creature you control gets +1/+1 for each other creature you control with the same name as that creature. In the older Kamigawa sets, this would be a bit better, as legendary matters was a huge theme. That's not so much the case in this set, and while there's a decent amount of legendaries, it's no more than something like Dominaria. As such, this is mostly 3 mana do nothing, and unfortunately is a F in draft. Network Terminal, 3 mana for an artifact. Tap, add 1 mana of any color, and 1 tap, tap another untapped artifact you control. Draw a card, then discard a card. That second ability can tap vehicles, treasures, clues, basically whatever to loot, which is quite strong. This also mana fixes, and at 3 mana mana ramp is the most you really want to pay for that effect, but having the ability to loot in addition to that is quite strong. While you don't want to rely on this too much, it can help significantly with splashes, or just to get those triple or quad pip cards. This is a C. Ninja's Kunai, 1 mana for an artifact equipment. Equip creature is 1 tap sack it. It deals 1 damage to any target with equip 1. This is very similar to the 1 mana to play, 5 mana or so to tap and destroy artifacts that they've been putting in just about every set. This one requires you to have a creature, which is the downside, but there's a lot of 1 and 2 mana creatures that this works well with. The fact that it's only 1 mana to tap and destroy it means that you don't actually have to hold up 4 or 5 mana like some of the other effects, and can do other things on your turn, and then just have the threat of this, which can prevent attacks, and especially ninjutsus. This is a C+. Papercraft Decoy, 2 mana for an artifact creature frog, 2/1 with, when it leaves the battlefield, you may pay 2. If you do, draw a card. This is pretty solid. Paying 2 is a little bit annoying to keep up, and when you play it on turn 2, then it has a decent chance of just dying, and you're not going to get the benefit, but still, it's a Goblin Piker, which is never the worst stats, and there's really not that many 1/3s running around in the set. The fact that you can get value off the various artifact synergies does boost this up a bit, and this is a C+. Patchwork Automaton, 2 mana for an artifact creature construct, a 1/1 with Ward 2. Whenever you cast an artifact spell, put a 1/1 counter on it. Now unfortunately this is not when an artifact enters the battlefield, but on cast. Again though, there are a lot of artifacts in the set, and the Ward 2 is huge. That means an opponent's going to have to spend their whole turn dealing with it basically, on any turn besides late game. This can go quite quickly, and in the blue-red-blue artifact decks, this is a key player, and in fact probably the best card that you want to pick up for those. This is a B. Reckoner Bankbuster, 2 mana for an artifact vehicle, 4/4. It enters the battlefield with 3 charge counters on it, and 2 tap, remove a charge counter from it, draw a card. Then there, if no charge counters on it, create a treasure token and a 1/1 pilot. With crew 3, this doesn't need to get rid of all the charge counters to become a 4/4, which means this can work as a blocker early, and then you can spell pay the 2, tap it, and draw a card. It's quite a bit of value for only 2 mana, and spread out over a number of turns. I like that you get a benefit when you manage to finish it, as you break the bank, so to speak, and that can help pay for removal that you've drawn with it. While you may get run over by aggro, trying to draw the cards with it, this is still going to be very solid in most games. This is a A-. Rito Sentinel, 3 mana for an artifact creature construct, Defender. When it enters the battlefield, target player mills 3 cards, and 3 mana, put target card from a graveyard on the bottom of its owner's library. While milling out's not a huge threat in this set, there are certain decks that this will actually matter for, and in those cases this is pretty solid. There's a decent amount of graveyard synergies as well, and this is pretty good defensively. It's not going to be wanted from every deck, but there are some that definitely need this, and for those, this is a C+. Runaway Trashbot, 3 mana for an artifact creature construct, a 0/4 with trample, and it gets +1/+0 for each artifact and or enchantment card in your graveyard. Getting bonuses in both types of cards means this easily becomes a 3/4 or 4/4 a few turns in the game. Trample means this becomes a big threat late game as well, and it is even a blocker just on turn 3 if nothing else has happened. This is a B-. Searchlight Companion, 3 mana for an artifact creature drone, flying 1/1. When it enters the battlefield, create a 1/1 colorless spirit creature token. This is a good ninjutsu enabler, and just putting a couple of bodies on the board for 3 mana is pretty solid. Unfortunately, the token it produces is not an artifact, which is quite relevant, but just coming up the board is pretty important in defensive decks, and this is a C+. Shrine Steward, 5 mana for an artifact creature construct, 3/2. When it enters the battlefield, you may search your library for an aura or shrine card, reveal it, put it in your hand, then shuffle. This obviously gets much better if you have Tamio's Completion or the Pacifism type effect, but if you're searching up a shrine, that's pretty decent too. In a dedicated shrine deck, this is going to be very good, but of course this is 5 mana, so you're not getting those shrines anywhere near on curve, which is a bit of a downside, and 5 mana 3/2 is pretty bad stats. Still, this is a 2-for-1 in basically every deck that's going to play this, so even losing the efficiency in terms of mana can be worth it. This is a C+. Surge Hacker Mech, 4 mana for an artifact creature vehicle. It's a 5/5 with menace, and when it enters the battlefield, it deals damage equal to twice the number of vehicles you control to target creature or planeswalker an opponent controls, with crew 4. So it comes in, deals 2 damage to a thing, then you have this 5/5 with Menace, which is quite a powerful attacker and dwarfs over every non-green creature in the set. It's not that hard to make this deal 4 or more damage as well, and vehicles are fairly safe from removal, avoiding blowouts. While it's unfortunate this can't deal any damage to the face, killing creature is often going to be good enough, and this is a B+. Thundersteel Colossus, 7 mana for an artifact creature, vehicle. It's a 7/7 with trample and haste and crew 2. Sometimes this come thundering down and end the game. Other times it's going to sit in your hand doing nothing. Though the format is slow, I think this just doesn't quite do enough for 7 mana, and on stalled board states, even coming down with this huge power, it's not going to be quite enough. While it will win some games, it's also going to lose some games rotting a hand, and this is a C-. Tawashi Guidebot, 4 mana for an artifact creature construct, a 2/1 with, when it enters the battlefield, put a 1/1 counter on target creature you control, and 4 tap draw card. This ability costs 1 less to activate for each modified creature you control. It's very easy to get this down to 2 tap draw card, which is very good, and it's possible to even make it no mana. Even just on its face, if it comes in, put a 1/1 counter on thing, and then dies, that's pretty good, and it even invites removal because of that drawing a card effect. So you've already got a mana from entering the battlefield, and your opponent has to use removal on it. That's quite good for only 4 mana. This is a B+. Walking Skyscraper, 8 mana for an artifact creature construct. It costs 1 less for each modified creature you control. It's an 8/8 trample, and it has hexproof as long as it's untapped. That means if you're playing this for, let's say 6 or 7 mana, that's an 8/8 trample hexproof, which your opponent's just going to have to deal with and be slammed by in the next couple of turns. But you don't even have to do that. You can wait for the perfect opportunity to do it when you have counters or other creatures attacking or whatever. The good circumstances, basically. It can also just act as a very solid defensive card on the ground, though flyers do, well, fly over it. Still, this is a game ender in a number of decks that aim for the late game, so this is a C+. Now with the lands, there are the cycle of 10 game lands in the set, so Bloodfell Caves, Blossoming Sands, Dismal Blackwater, Jungle Hollow, Rugged Highlands, Scoured Barrens, Swiftwater Cliffs, Thornwood Falls, and Tranquil Clove, and Windscarred Crag. These are all very good, or in the basic land slot as opposed to an actual card. These often get picked a bit later than you'd expect, and you want to pick these up decently early. They help smooth out draws, and getting color screwed is never fun. These are C+. Then we have the channel lands. Boseiju Who Endures, Ijango, Seat of the Empire, Otawara, Soaring City, Sokenzan, Crucible of Defiance, and Takanuma, Abandoned Mire. These are all very strong, acting as untapped lands in the single color they represent, as well as having an uncounterable channel effect that does something strong. Removal, bouncing something, returning something, creating a couple of 1/1s. These are all very strong and are B+. Then we have Mech Hanger. It's tap, add 1 colorless, or tap, add 1 mana of any color, but only to cast pilots or vehicle spells, and 3 tap, target vehicle becomes an artifact creature until end of turn. The ability to turn on your vehicles with no creatures is pretty significant and dodges one of the most frequent cases with vehicles in Limited, where you've got a couple of them down, but nothing to accrue them. This ignores crew costs as well, meaning that 3 or 4 power necessary doesn't even matter. Admittedly, being a colorless land is a downside, but this is quite good for that effect, and doesn't even enter the battlefield tapped. This is a B. Roadside Reliquary. Tap, add colorless, and 2 tap sack it, draw card if you control an artifact, and draw card if you control an enchantment. At its base level, this draws no cards if you don't have either, but it's very easy to have one, and not too hard to have both, making this a land that is a divination late in the game. That's very strong, and again, it is untapped. This is a B. Secluded Courtyard. As it enters the battlefield, choose a creature type. Tap, add colorless, or tap to add 1 mana of any color to cast a creature spell of that type, or activate an ability of a creature or creature card of the chosen type. Notably, Shrine is not a creature type, despite being in the type line for a creature. I may have made that mistake, but you don't have to. In Limited, this is really not necessary. This is a constructed plant. While it can help fix for creatures, the fact that it doesn't for spells is hugely significant. And this is a D. Uncharted Haven. It enters the battlefield tapped. When it enters the battlefield, choose a color, and then tap, add 1 mana of the chosen color. This is a Evolving Wilds effect minus the shuffle, which is good and bad. Ultimately though, this fixes for the color that you need right now when you need it. Tapped is a big downside, but in any deck that's splashing, or 3 or more colors, this is going to be an important part of the mana base, so this is a C+. And that's all the cards for the set. I hope you enjoyed it, and if you could like, subscribe, take a look at my Patreon, and have a lovely day.